Get ready to explore the future of healthcare and innovation with Nach Davé and Junaid Mian. Nach Davé, a healthcare executive and regulatory affairs expert, brings over 23 years of experience in the pharmaceutical and medical devices industry. Known for his strategic expertise, Nach has been instrumental in supporting medtech startups and advancing clinical and regulatory strategies. Junaid Mian, a pharmacist, entrepreneur, and investor, sees the space economy as a driver for economic growth and healthspan. As an early investor in Axiom Space and other biotech ventures, he's always seeking groundbreaking opportunities in both terrestrial and space-based biotech. Join us as Nach and Junaid share their insights into healthcare, biotech, and the exciting potential of space-driven innovation. Well, of course, with that intro, I have to let you know a little bit about my background. My father actually was a space guy back in the 60s in Florida, where we used to shoot rockets up and then they would go down Cocoa Beach, and they would have to get rid of them before they hurt anybody, kind of deal. Let's just say the truly exploratorial phase. So me watching a space, anything to do with space, is very exciting. Even to this day, I love to watch these launches and stuff. So I think it's really cool what you guys are doing. So I guess I'll start with you, Junaid, only because I'm connected to the space background. How did you get into the space thing? Because when I left Florida when I was younger and people went outside, they'd watch the big launches, but very few people were kind of connected to space. It was kind of a rare to feel a visceral hey, I love space, because it was a very small industry at the time. So how'd you get excited about it?
Well, I've always been excited about space. Growing up, obviously, like any other kid, I wanted to be an astronaut. Had no idea how to be an astronaut. Became a pharmacist. Well, anyhow.
That's kind of a miss there.
I went way off course, man.
I'm not sure how that worked out, but okay.
Their orbital transfer was way off. So, it was a couple of years after I graduated. I always had that bug of wanting to go to space and all that. But it was in December 2015 that, that first stage returned for the Falcon 9. And I realized that was a pivotal moment, not just for SpaceX, but for humanity in general. And at that point, a lot of things I learned along the way, they started crystallizing more. I realized that the gateway to space was open and that we can use space as a platform to increase human health span.
Well, that's amazing. You want to tell us why you think that may happen? Only because, space is very different in space. You want to explain the difference when you're doing something in space and maybe doing it on Earth, and why that is a potential game changer for us all?
Yeah, absolutely. So in space, you can see and understand many biological processes a lot more clearer just because of the environment of microgravity. So I'll give you an example. In space, you can grow protein crystals that are a lot more, the most perfect. And what that allows you to do, it allows you to change the formulation of many drugs. And so IV drugs can then be given subcutaneously, which then changes a lot. If you're familiar with IV infusions, they can take a while. And sometimes you have to go somewhere else to do them. Mm-hmm. And sometimes you just can't get there, so you're not going to get it. Well, if you make it subcutaneous, you can just give the injection to yourself at home.
Can you explain what that is exactly?
It's for all those folks out there who take insulin, who also take now Ozempic.
Right.
That's subcutaneous.
Okay.
So you just literally can stab that into your thigh.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Or any other fatty part of your body.
Wow. Okay, so some of the experiments, you see things more clearly. You can do things more directly, more targeted. It sounds like, right, as far as what your results are going to be, and you don't have the interference of things like what I guess is it the gravity? Is it? I mean, what's interfering with that process that maybe is not happening in microgravity? Okay,
the gravity interferes with that whole process. So even in space, you could 3D print literally in 3 dimensions,
right?
X, Y, and Z axes. Or on Earth, you're actually printing on a surface, and then you're going above that surface.
Right.
But in space, you can print in 3 dimensions. So imagine printing a heart in space.
Right.
You literally have these 3D printed heads going in those 3 dimensions, printing that heart.
Okay, but that's a biological material. I understand when I'm taking how are you printing a biological material? You want to explain that, because you're dealing with cells and you're dealing with fiber. You're dealing with all kinds of interesting things. So I get it if you're doing like a plastic, that I get. But how are you? That sounds very complicated to me.
Well, you'd use a bio ink. So a bio ink would literally be an ink full of cells.
Okay.
And those cells, you'd be using those cells to print. So on Earth, you'd use a scaffold, say the shape of an organ, and then you would print on that scaffold, and the cells would then eventually come together to make the organ.
Okay.
But in space, you won't need that scaffolding because they'd be held in place.
Okay.
In microgravity.
Now, if I'm building an organ, let's say I need a new heart, I assume it needs to, I don't want to reject it. So am I taking my cells and building this thing
that's right.
for myself? So I could literally say, if you need an extra roll of toilet paper, buy extra toilet paper. If you might need an extra heart, you can go down to Junaid and he'll print you an extra heart just in case you might need it someday. This is kind of really crazy stuff in my head. This is awesome, but is that kind of what we're thinking? I mean,
that's exactly what we're thinking.
Okay.
Yeah, well, that's exactly what we're thinking. So you would usually take the patient's own cells, roll them out for the bio ink, and then print them whatever organ that they need.
Okay. Now let's say I have a heart imperfection, and I come in, I go, hey, look, that heart's really cool, but can we tweak it a little bit so next time I don't have a little AFib going on or whatever, right? Can we like maybe do a little repair work while we're building my new heart? Can I do a custom heart? How's that?
A custom heart.
Made to order.
Made to order, yeah. I hope so one day, but I think we're going to take baby steps before we get to that heart.
Okay.
Yeah.
So right now, your experimental level, I mean, where are we at today? And I hear where we're going, hopefully, right? But like today, obviously I can't go into my doc's office. Gee, I'd like to order a heart. Can you send it to me in a couple of weeks?
Well, hopefully we're going to get there one day.
Okay.
Right now, obviously, we can't do that. They can print certain organs or certain parts of organs.
Really?
But the full organ is still a challenge.
So what can we do today, right now, like right this minute? What kinds of things can we do that maybe I hadn't thought of?
Well, right now we can make organoids, which are little small versions of organs that we can test drugs on.
Okay.
And the testing of that drug can inform the AI system itself.
Okay.
On what's going on and so forth. So we can do that right now.
So you build like literally like a mini heart? Is that what we're talking about?
Like
so
a mini heart, mini heart cells or whatever it may be, some miniature version.
Right.
Right? Almost like a basic version of that organ. And then you can test on that organ.
Okay.
Whereas, before you have to test other ways on an animal and so forth.
Right.
But animal testing and human testing are two different things.
Yeah, because I hear about like they put pig hearts in people and things like that, right? There's all kinds of issues with that.
Well, there's another thing called xenotransplantation where they can grow a human heart in a pig and then harvest the pig and put that. Yeah, there's still issues with that.
Okay.
Scaling it might be an issue, but I think this way is a lot cleaner.
Okay. So then you're building these hearts, and you just mentioned AI. So to me, that's kind of an exponential learning curve. So the more of these you're able to do, then I suspect this compounds on itself, right? I would suspect, because the AI can analyze this a lot quicker than a human scientist could probably do it, I would think.
Absolutely. It's exponential. Yeah. So everything we learn is being compounded, and then the AI learns more and more. So what that does is you can literally replicate. It'll be a digital version of a person in many ways.
Right.
So you can test whatever you want on this digital person.
Okay.
So you kind of get around a lot of the ethical concerns as well.
Right.
But above that it's more of a robust model.
Right.
Right. And this AI person, synthetic person, can represent a large portion of people.
Right.
And if it works on this AI model, odds are it's going to work on most people. But eventually, medicine's going to be personalized where it works for you.
Right.
Not based on some bell curve of how many people fit under the curve. The future is going to be personalized.
Yeah. So any projections on when we might start seeing this go? I mean, what are kind of your thoughts? I know it's all experimental right now, but
well, here's the thing, right? It's not on a linear scale.
Right.
It's exponential, so it's hard to predict. But you know what? Just for the show, I'll put it out there.
Let's hear it.
All right. I'd say before 2040,
really?
you'll see a lot of this. I think so.
Okay, it's probably about when I might need. I'll be roughly 80 years old, so if I need some replacement parts, I'm going to call you up and say, "Hey, dude, man, I got a little issue here. You mind
I'll hook you up with a new heart,
just in case."
Yeah, I'll hook you up with a new heart.
Wow, that's
maybe Junaid, you can pre-book them.
Oh, can we do that? Can we like a cemetery plot? Can I like pre-purchase my heart for in 2040?
You won't need a cemetery to go to, Kurt.
What's I mean, like a plot, like you know how you pay for the
like
plot.
a plot.
I want to buy my heart now, like if I need it later on.
Kind of like a Thanksgiving turkey kind of thing.
Yeah. So I'll buy it ahead of time. You know, save up my points for my grocery bill, maybe.
You're gonna need a lot of points.
What's that get? So you can do that, I assume. Well, we talked about heart, but I mean, the other thing I hear about is like my wife has some neurological damage, like where she has a drop foot and there's issues going on with the leg. And so is this the kind of thing we could go in and say, hey, can we regrow things? Can we like come in and say, hey, let's take your material and maybe let's help you like fix spine. I'm thinking about like spinal injuries and people who like get paralysis, and can you really kind of, I'm an engineer, so I'm like rewiring you. Can we like hook you back up again so this thing works again?
Well, that's all regenerative medicine. Yeah. And a lot of that won't have to be done in space.
Okay.
A lot of it can be done on Earth as well.
Okay.
And so regenerative medicine is going to be one of the huge spots in healthcare because it solves a lot of issues.
Right.
A lot of issues.
All right. Well, thank you. We're going to take a quick break. You're listening to Master Your Finances. Welcome back. You're listening to Master Your Finances. All right, Junaid, that was awesome. I appreciate that. We're going to move on from just a little bit to Nach. Tell me a little bit about how you got into what regulatory affairs expert. Sounds like something that I'm glad exists and I don't have to deal with, because that's the kind of one where you make a phone call and write a check and you're like, you guys help me out, man. So how did you get into that? Because that sounds like a nightmare to me. So why'd you get into that?
I think you're spot on. Nobody really gets into it. It's one of those situations where they say, oh, well, we got this real complicated document that we need to send to the FDA. Who's going to want to help? And everyone else moves back and you're standing around. And they're like, oh, you're the lucky one.
So you're the last man standing? Is that what it was? You're the last one in the room?
That's how it is. No one ever comes out of school saying, hey, I want to do regulatory.
Okay. So how did it happen to you? You're literally...
That's exactly how it happened. Okay. I was like kind of the newbie on the scene. Okay. And they said, oh, here we go. We got a live one. Why don't we give him all of this stuff?
Okay.
And that's how I got into it.
Okay.
And then I guess, once you get past all of the boring paperwork, there is an element to it that is kind of exciting, because you do have an opportunity to really put a strategy together on how to get some of these drugs and devices onto the market. And for me, that's what's kind of kept me around, because that's the type of stuff that, excites you and kind of gets you out of bed is, hey, if you don't figure out how to convince the government to, accept the data or figure out how you want to develop this drug, there could be millions of people who will never benefit from that therapy. So you really do kind of feel excited about potentially impacting millions and millions of people. And that's what got me into it.
So here's a question I have for you, because I hear a lot of times where people say, hey, why isn't this available here? It's available in Canada. It's available in Europe. It's available wherever.
Yeah.
Sometimes I feel like we seem to be really good at creating these pharmaceutical drugs and things, but we seem to be like last to adopt for some reason. That's my perception. What's your perception from a regulatory standpoint, and why do you think at least that perception is out there, and is that a reality?
A bit of a reality.
Okay.
And the thing is that, in the U.S., the FDA is considered the gold standard in terms of all of the, from an integrity standpoint or in terms of scrutiny that they put in before you get a drug onto the market. Now, there's going to be some folks who probably disagree with me and say, well, there's a lot of politics involved. And politics are always involved, as we've seen over the last couple of days.
Of course.
So
it's always part of the process.
Always
for
part
sure.
of the process,
always part
right?
of it. Yep. Yeah.
So certainly politics is involved. However, the level of sort of rigor and scientific scrutiny that happens in the U.S., probably Europe is the only comparable sort of regulatory venue, and possibly Japan are the areas that are kind of considered gold standards in terms of drug and device development and approval. Mm-hmm. So that's why I used to live in San Diego.
Okay.
I used to go down to Mexico all the time. And all of these drugs that we had to get scripts for are all available on the shelf there.
Okay.
So you can go to 7-Eleven and get the most potent antibiotic or most potent drug that you want. You don't need a script or any of that stuff.
Okay.
But then you go back and realize, how did those drugs get onto that shelf? And then you're probably thinking that, maybe I don't want to take these drugs because I'm not sure how they got there. or how
Right.
how much scrutiny was placed before these drugs were made available to the market.
And I'm a little curious, is there data like comparing like US efficacy and like, side effects compared to like going to a Mexico where it's more readily available? Are we
The good
there's
news,
got to be a whole different set of data, right? What do we see
yeah, I mean,
in reality?
very simply put, we do all of the data gathering, and to some degree, that's why drugs are expensive here in the U.S. We generate the data,
Right.
and then the rest of the world kind of uses that data to approve stuff in their own country.
Okay.
Like, hey, you got data from the U.S., so it should be good because it was scrutinized.
So does like a Mexico say, well, all right, it didn't kill these first 3 people, so
Yeah.
we're good to go? Whereas we might say you need 1,000 before we like figure it out. So they're like ready to adopt it long before you feel like you've collected enough. Because we're all different, obviously.
We're all
So, I mean,
different.
you need a lot of people and a lot of like data to really figure out what the issues are, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And by no means, I mean, look, the Mexican government and their authorities are doing what they need to do for
Right.
their country. And certainly they're all, I'm not diluting any of their standards.
Right.
They hold themselves to high standards as well. But the way the U.S. develops drugs, the way it sort of evaluates drugs is by far at a much, much higher level than anywhere sort of else in the world. And that's why I think, that's why I think the product that you get in the U.S. is stellar.
Okay.
And that's only half the equation. The other half is the follow-up, right? So if you
Right.
release a drug to the market and you start seeing these side effects and all these types of adverse reactions and so forth, we have a fairly robust reporting protocol and follow-up. Whereas in a place like, I mean, I do a lot of research in India, and India is a very advanced, a lot of good science. However, from a patient perspective, from a follow-up perspective, there's virtually zero follow-up.
Interesting.
And there's zero reporting because, these types of systems just don't exist. So if something's going wrong with a drug, it'll take a long time for some of these for it to show up on the radar in some of these other places than it would in the U.S. So we do have a great vigilance and monitoring program for anything that's approved by the FDA.
So are they literally like relying on the U.S. to determine whether or not there might be some issues?
Yeah.
And if we pull something off the shelf, does that mean someplace like India or Mexico might say, hey, U.S. says this is maybe an issue, let's pull it off? Is that the kind of thing that typically happens?
They certainly take it into consideration.
Okay.
And then they look at it a bit closer and then start looking at whether, the same things are happening. And because as you said correctly, everybody's different.
Right.
So we may see cases here that may not translate one-to-one into
Yeah.
India.
And the
or-
environments can be different too, like
Yeah.
the environmental
the diet's
situation.
different, environment's
exactly.
different, so many variables,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So, but certainly once we raise the alert or the red flag, it's taken into consideration by many of these other sort of geographies.
Okay. So my next question is going to be similar to what Junaid, I asked him just a minute ago. It's like, all right, now that we've got this whole AI thing going on, are there ways to speed up that process and increase the result accuracy by allowing these models to help us? And how would that actually be implemented? Because that's just a computer. So how we actually, it's not a person, right? So how are we using that data to kind of project maybe what we need to be looking at and whether or not there might be an issue with the population in certain circumstances?
Yeah, I mean, similar to what Junaid was saying, AI and this sort of data feed that's coming, we've been always collecting data.
Right.
But we just didn't, until now, we really haven't had a great use for it. So now what's happening is you got all this data, especially on these drug and side effects side of things, totally makes sense because there's a lot of repetition. Like the side effects that have been identified in the research happen all the time, over and over and over again. So this machine learning and this data pool allows us to better understand the side effects, and these AI models are going to pick that up all the time. And we're relying more and more on these AI models going forward.
So how do you parse out, and I'm going to get the term wrong, but how do you parse out when somebody has a coexisting condition? Like let's say, I don't have a respiratory issue and a heart issue, and the other person doesn't. They may have one or the other, but I'm dealing with like some kind of respiratory medication or something. But so you've got all these variables, I guess is what I'm saying, is even in medical conditions. So how do you as a data collector take that into account, whether I have diabetes, whether I have high blood pressure, whatever, all these other things that could potentially be going on to determine whether it's actually this drug or it just happens to be this person's condition is so poor that almost anything is going to hurt them, right? Or help them for that matter, right?
And that's a great question because that was a anomaly just a few years ago. But what we've gone through over the last, I'd say, 5 to 7 years is this sort of upgrade in electronic health records.
Okay.
Now that everything is tagged in the databases, it's really easy for us to differentiate between what conditions you have or I have.
Right.
And differentiate, because now everything's coded, right?
Okay.
Even for reimbursement, things are coded.
Right.
So now your entire profile is basically data tags.
Okay.
So now we know whether it's the heart condition that's causing this, or it's the kidney failure, or what have you. It's so much more accurate to just get a data cut of your profile and decide what's the culprit and what's doing the damage.
Do they include like things like that may not be considered, maybe they are considered medical, like obesity as an example? Because I know like for respiratory issues, I mean, if you're obviously way more, your heart's working more, your respiratory system's working more than somebody maybe the same, like me, I know that if I lose weight, I have better blood pressure issues. If I'm heavier, my blood pressure goes up. So I know even within my own body that I can one time have pre-hypertension and other times I'm fine. So do we account for that
absolutely
as well?
It's accounted for, and it's all the variables are sort of, and that's sort of the beauty of AI now, because now the data is starting to talk to each other.
Okay.
And by talking to each other, we're starting to get more and more accurate profiles in terms of what are the codependencies,
right?
Whether it's weight gain or weight loss or your diet or what have you. Everything's starting to now make sense. It's coming together. In the past, we were looking at everything in silos. Now we're looking at everything in terms of the holistic picture of your health.
Okay.
So that's where AI and data and all these things are helping us.
So you mentioned holistic, so we can add, because I'm going to see an integrative doctor. So you're looking at like the right traditional medicine along with maybe not quite as traditional, but seeing how they flow together. So is the whole modeling process going to track all this? So they say, hey,
yes,
maybe you need to take a medication, or maybe no, maybe you need to do this first, lose 10, 20 pounds first. Let's see what happens. Are we going to start having these kind of conversations saying this might be more effective than the other prior to saying, go ahead and take the pill, but let's lose 10 pounds, then take the pill. Let's see what happens, then take the pill if we still need to.
Absolutely. It's to what Junaid was saying, that medicine will get super specialized as we go into the future, because now all of these factors are well known and we can make adjustments based on you and not necessarily just the generic patient.
Awesome. Okay, we're going to take another quick break. You're listening to Master Your Finances. All right, welcome back. You're listening to Master Your Finances. Okay, now you guys have told us all about these great technologies which are going to lead to longevity, positive and negative issues in my mind, right? So if we start actually solving for, because this is something that I deal with, like with high net worth clients, a lot of people think that they're worried about their wealth, they're worried about this, that. Actually, the number one concern about those in that high net worth category is longevity, not just longevity, but quality of life. Nobody wants to live, in a nursing home for 20 years, right? We want to live our full life, happy, healthy, mobile, interactive, all that other good stuff. And then eventually one day that's the end, right? To me, that's the ideal. I'm going to go, and then one day it ends, and that's it, right? So now that we're solving for this,
right?
How do you think that's going to impact both individuals and societies in ways we probably haven't truly thought of?
That's a real juicy question. I think both of us can attack this one, Nach. So I'm gonna get this one ready, and then you can go delve into it, right?
Set it up.
Well, I want to preface by saying that when we're talking about longevity, we're talking about people living healthier for longer, not living for longer. All right, I've been there.
Agreed.
I've seen it.
Yeah.
I've seen it up front. It's not very pretty. So let's say the average age becomes 120, okay, across the board, which means that a lot of people will be 120 years old. Hopefully they won't look 120, right? Now, one thing people have to understand is as you're living longer, that social system that you're in, the social structure matters a lot. So people talk about blue zones and so forth. The one thing they all share in common, regardless of geography, is that there's a community that's still intact. Their friends and family, a lot of them are still around. It doesn't make sense to live to like 120 when everybody else around you is gone. So think about everybody still being around. So what does that mean? It means that families stay intact because the person's still there. They have an influence. There's a lot of wisdom that can be passed down. Things that aren't found on the internet. Things that even ChatGPT doesn't know, right?
There is such a thing?
There is. There's some things that it doesn't know yet until it taps into your brain. But until then, there's a lot of wisdom that can be imparted down the stream. So you'll have generational households, right across the board. Have we ever had that before? Not really. So do we know what to do with that? We don't. But you know what? I think it would be very good. I think having your family intact, not everybody living in the same house, obviously, but
that'd be like Thanksgiving 24/7.
Yeah, it's like Home Alone every day. Do you remember all those people were together in that one house?
There you go.
That will have
that'd be a little too much.
That's going to have an adverse effect on longevity.
I think Kevin wanted to go in the attic.
There you go. Maybe.
But it changes everything. If you know that you're going to live to about 120, your decisions today are different than if you weren't. You think more long term. You think more consciously about what you're doing. So there's a lot less short-term thinking and more long-term thinking, because you're going to be literally intersecting that decision down the road. So I think there's a big ripple effect to society that people aren't thinking about, but I think a lot of it's good.
I'd have to agree. As one thing I try to emphasize with my clients is I look at their family life expectancy based on their personal conditions relative to their relatives. Like, do you have high blood pressure? Does your mother, your dad? How long do they live? We have these conversations to give an estimate of what they think realistically the longevity is. And then I encourage them, then add about 10 years minimum, because that's probably more accurate based on everything that's happening right now. And that could actually get even bigger, right? Because as we advance these things, and one of my concerns from my perspective, especially those that don't have ultra high net worth and not really, they'll outlive it. I mean, they're fine financially regardless, but you have this mass affluent, which may actually outlive their wealth and have to change their lifestyle if they live 50, 60 years in retirement. And you have to be aware of that at least and understand, well, how are you going to manage that whole thing, both financially and you pointed out socially.
Right.
And I think we've gotten better at connecting older people to new friends and family, so they continue to have friends. That social aspect of your life is really, really important, because you don't just want to exist and be older. You want to actually be socially active and interacting with people that you know and care about, right?
Yeah. There's a couple of interesting things that are going on, and I've kind of seen it firsthand with my own mother and father. One thing is that generation, and even to some degree my generation, has always been sort of trying to, when it comes to longevity or disease or anything, we're kind of like, okay, let's treat what happens, let's treat the symptoms, but we haven't really thought about preventive, the preventive medicine.
Right.
But now you see that all the time. A lot of, like Ozempic itself is out there, and what are they doing? Hey, let's try to do something to prevent the sort of the chronic issues, the chronic diseases that have been sort of knocking us out over the years. So now there's a mind shift in terms of, there is value in preventive medicine. There is value in changing your habits, so you're going to prevent some of these diseases. That's number one. And the social aspect, it's interesting. When my sort of father passed away and my mom was challenged in that generation, where's she going to go for, her social life or what have you? It was one thing that, and we're all working, the kids are going to school. So she actually turned to technology to really strengthen her social life and kind of fill that gap that we created by not being around her. So as technology starts to evolve, this whole concept of longevity and it is really makes sense. There's a very logical sort of cohesion here in terms of longevity, technology. We've seen, robots who are now in Japan, you get a robot companion.
Like iRobot.
Yeah. And people are completely fine with that, right? So,
so how old was your mother when this all occurred?
So she was in her mid-70s, and now she's
even older people, I just want to make sure people know, even older people can adopt technology. Sometimes and a lot more older people are involved in technology than ever before, I think, correct?
Absolutely.
That's what I'm saying.
Well, most of them are on Facebook, aren't they?
I know the kids abandoned it, right? They've moved on.
Yeah, they've moved on to TikTok.
Now it's older people are on Facebook, right?
Yeah. So, it's things like that. She's probably got the highest score on Angry Birds in the entire house.
There you go.
Oh, my goodness. That's funny.
That's the type of things that we're seeing out there.
Okay. Well, you just talked about something that I think comes up a lot, at least in social connections. Like, isn't our system designed to create chronically ill people? Because now that's a revenue stream for the industry. So how do you counteract the financial incentive? Like, I would rather give you a diabetic medicine for the rest of your life than cure you, because now I lose my revenue stream. So there's a hard financial issue going on here, because they're using that money to research other things. But at some point they're like, do we really want to release this? Because if we do, we might disrupt our entire business model and we lose all this revenue stream. So what are your thoughts about that whole potential conflict of interest almost?
Well, think about it like this, okay? You're an insurance company, and the thing you hate the most is paying out claims.
Very much so. Yes, I agree.
It's you just hate paying out claims. You wish you never had to.
Yeah, I want that bonus at the end of the year instead.
Just keep getting the premiums, right? Well, look, if people are living healthier for longer,
right,
they're paying premiums, and you're not paying out a lot because they're healthier.
Right.
Now, even say you have a treatment that can cure something. I'm not going to go deep into that.
Right.
But there are several out there. They're expensive up front. But once that's done, the person no longer goes to the hospital. Okay, it's done over a course of a couple of days or maybe a week or two, and it's the end of it.
Okay,
right? Maybe a couple of months, but that's it. Now think about it. That person no longer has to go to the hospital, and if they die, those premiums stop. And plus, the insurance company just outlaid all those payouts, right? Now think about the payouts being decreased, and now the premiums just keep coming in for year after year after year.
Right.
That changes it. Now, it's like turning the Titanic around here. We're not going to flip over, but I think we're making that turn. And a lot of it has to do with technology and AI. We didn't have the ability to make these predictions before.
Right.
Right? It was just like, I think you're going to make it. You might not. But now there'll be some quantitative way to say, hey, based on all this, odds are you getting that is about this much now.
Because you're bringing up an interesting point, because I hear the medical profession talks about how when you try to go to these more advanced potential the ones that really want to do this, right? It's easier just to give you the medicine they all accept and put the code in and you get paid and they're done. And they get it every month and they get whatever. But then it's like, hey, look, this you might actually benefit from this thing. It might cost 10 times as much, but it's going to solve it potentially.
Right.
So how do we? Because I know they file these claims over and over and over and over again. And then finally it goes through. I don't know how they do this. It drives me crazy. But apparently, I don't even understand it. But so how do we get that model shifted so the insurance company understands the financial benefit of this? Because right now they don't seem to get it. Or maybe they don't feel it is beneficial. Maybe their actuarial data is saying it's not beneficial. So how are we get through that pass and get to the other side somehow?
Yeah. So I mean, it's interesting what's happening. 2 or 3 days ago, I had a call with a company called Afora Health, and what they're doing is they're making the insurance companies realize other areas of revenue. So now what the insurance companies are doing is they're getting into telecommunications. They're getting into apparel. So what they're saying, So what they're saying, okay. and into car manufacturing, et cetera. So what they're saying is, if we indeed create additional years and longevity for the citizens, they're going to go and they're going to use that phone 10 years more. They're going to go out and buy maybe another car, or they're going to buy some more clothes. So the whole paradigm, I think, is shifting in terms of incentivizing insurance companies or all these benefactors who are in the old model, they wanted you to kind of drop dead at 70 or 72, are saying, no, now people are living to 90 and 100 and 120. So there are other forms of revenue that can substitute and that they can use over a long period of time. So there's a lot of diversification going on in the insurance markets and the insurance companies, and they're basically partnering up with Visa, American Express. They're benefiting from this longevity phenomenon.
Awesome. We're going to take another quick break. You're listening to Master Your Finances. Welcome back. You're listening to Master Your Finances. This has really been fascinating. So how do we tie in all this longevity stuff going on with all the space stuff that's happening with the microgravity and all the experimentation? So how does all this piece together, and what do you see the future holding as far as this whole path goes?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would consider it a virtuous feedback loop, right? So in space, you're going to have a lot of these floating labs once the ISS comes down. And these labs, some will have a little bit of tourism on there, but largely it'll be in space manufacturing to make many life science products, other materials, and so forth, beneficial for those on Earth. Now, what's going to happen, I think, is as this loop gets started, so you create these products in space. Not every product has to be made in space, but some that are will be used to obviously help people live healthier for longer. But as they live healthier for longer, then more products will come on board. So as this virtuous cycle starts to get into motion, that's going to push on. So the space economy is going to drive the economy here and back and forth. As people live longer, more ideas can come into play. And it just grows the sphere. So humanity's sphere will start to grow beyond the Earth, literally spreading us into our neck of the woods here in the solar system. It sounds very fantastical and out there, but it's already being done. These stations, the first station is coming up on, is going to be launched next year, late next year.
So what's that one going to be special, guys, again, station?
They have a means to do a spectrum of gravity. So they can go microgravity all the way to 1G.
Really?
Yeah.
So can I be a tourist and go out and hang out here? And
well, let me talk to somebody about that.
No, I'm just kidding.
But you'll be able to test many variations of gravity to see where what happens. So many products can be made in different gradients of gravity. Right? So then the next station goes up after that. There's another one. So by the time the ISS is retired, you're going to have about 4 or 5 stations up there.
Wow.
Those are private space stations. So that's a lot different. The ISS was government run. That's a whole different thing there because there's no drive for profits. There's no drive for innovation. If there's an innovation, it's like a side effect. Hey, great.
Yeah.
You got this great thing that came out of it. But that wasn't like a mandate or whatever.
Right.
Right. On the private stations, they have a drive to make money.
That means that space is finally getting economically viable.
Correct.
Right? 'Cause, the reason the government gets involved in the first place is because it's something that private industry just would not pay that amount of money because the return is going to take so long. It's too high risk.
Governments come in to pave the way at first.
Yeah, they kind of get started, but then once you get to that privatization, that's where things really take off.
That is how government-private partnerships should play out.
Right.
They lay the groundwork, and then the private industry then builds on that.
Then NASA moves on to the next thing.
Absolutely.
They'll find something else that's crazy that we're all like,
they've got a lot
sounds
to work
cool,
on.
but I'm not going to put money in that deal.
You're exactly right, Kurt. They're paving the way for going forward, right?
Yeah.
And so once those stations go up, then it starts to kickstart this virtuous cycle.
Right.
I think that's how it's going to play out. And so space is a large part of that because it allows for that. Mm-hmm. So you could think of space as a platform, right? It's a place where you can learn, do things, make things that you just can't do here. And we're already doing it. So look at Starship. Remember that with the chopsticks?
Yeah.
That is a pivotal thing. I mean, people thought that was going to happen 10 years from now.
Right.
It happened, 2-3 weeks ago?
That's right.
Right? Once that frequency is established,
right,
you can go up and down frequently.
So the safety, it's interesting to me because I mean, as I told you, I lived through this whole initial process, and it's like, to us, every time a rocket went up and it was successful, like, you breathe a sigh of relief. Now it's almost like they're getting a taxi ride somewhere.
It's commonplace.
I mean, it's like, so, and I understand how complicated these things are, and I'm like, don't take it for granted this thing is going up and coming down. There's a lot going on there, man. There's a lot of forces acting against this vehicle. That a lot of times I don't know that people are appreciating just how complicated and how difficult it is to get one of those things up there.
When it becomes commonplace like that, Kurt, you know that it's arrived. When you take it for granted, it's now normalized. So it's allowed to grow further now because people have accepted it. Like you don't expect that rocket not to come back. You know it's coming back.
Right now, yeah.
But it doesn't have to, like you said. It doesn't have to.
Right.
But
any mistake up there,
it's over.
The environment is very unfriendly.
It's unforgiving.
So,
yeah, no, absolutely. I think you hit on a few interesting points, and what I'd like to add to that is that just like we used to watch in the movies or in the cartoons, the Jetsons and all these things, like those are all kind of things we grew up thinking, it's in the Hollywood or it's in the cartoons, and now it's become.
I'm still waiting for my flying car.
Yeah, well, it's coming.
It's coming.
A bunch of flying cars are coming. So, and I think as we look at, all the topics we've talked about today, longevity and medicine and space, they all kind of come together because now you're finally getting a chance to move past sort of the restrictions of Earth, and now going to space is actually going to become affordable. It's going to become something that's acceptable. It's not necessarily a government thing. It's not just big government sort of doing it. And because of all this privatization that Junaid is talking about, you and I can imagine going to space as either a traveler or even work up there.
Right.
There's new jobs, new economies, new professions that are going to be created where, Junior's going to say, hey, I'm going to go work in space. Just like, people say, hey, I'm going to go work in London or Paris. Now you're going to go and say, I'm going to work in space. And I think that's where I think the fascinating part of the human race evolving, and the things like longevity and drug discovery and all these things are going to be needed, because in order for this evolution to continue, we're going to need these things in place.
Interesting. So that means if I'm in space, that means for more than 180 days, I get tax exempt for U.S. taxes. Is there going to be a tax benefit to go up there?
Does that mean you're permanently going to move to space?
I don't know. Yeah, maybe a citizen of space.
What would your address look like?
I don't know, man. That's like.
And being,
the mailman might be upset.
Yeah, the mail. Yeah.
So would it just say?
I gotta go up there.
Would it just say what? Shackleton crater, the moon? Like, what would it say?
Exactly. So
don't do mail forwarding. That's for sure.
Yeah.
So how are we doing? I guess I know there's a bunch of countries involved in this. So who's kind of leading the way? And like, what do you see? Because I see Elon Musk, I see Bezos, I see all these people involved here, but I know we're not the only ones doing this stuff, right? It's kind of there's a couple other places. The Chinese, I think, are doing it. Europe's doing it, right?
It's largely a global effort,
right?
But primarily led by the United States.
Okay.
China, obviously, you got India going in the game as well. UAE's in there. Obviously Europe is in there.
Yeah, Japan.
There are so many countries involved in the whole supply chain of space that you'd be surprised.
Okay.
Just about everyone has a touch point in there.
Right.
You just don't know about it, but it's true. They're there.
So as far as like these first ones going up, what types of things do you think they'll be developing to start? 'Cause you have to start somewhere, and then obviously you see it kind of expanding from there. So there's got to be kind of that, I call it the skateboard effect. We start with the skateboard, you build the scooter, the motorcycle, the car. I mean, so what's our first thing that's going to benefit from that microgravity and all that kind of thing?
I don't know what the killer app is going to be just yet. I have a couple of ideas. I just can't disclose them here, but
okay.
they're quite beneficial.
Okay.
Like if they start that off, it'll be the right way to do it.
Okay.
So you're not going to create like little widgets, and then morph into something important. It's going to be good stuff first.
Right.
Yeah. To show that it's viable. And right now it's showing that it is. It's just a matter of scaling it up.
So these things we're doing on Earth currently, they're like, hey, if we were able to do this in space, we're going to like have a much better result. Like something we kind of already know about, but now we're going to like really push it forward.
That's right. So say a company wanted to make a product that it's hard to copycat, right? So if they made it in space, in order to copycat that, you'd have to go to space. So why would you copycat it?
Yeah, it's a little bit of a barrier for entry.
Yeah, it is. It'll be cheap enough where people can get in.
So I can't start my thing
in
the garage anymore. I got to start it in my pod in space now. Is that what the new?
No,
is that the new thing?
You can start it in your garage on Earth.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. The proverbial garage is back.
Still, all right. There you go.
Yeah.
Now, can I rent space? Now, let's say I've got a little thing I want to do, and like, hey, I'd like to send this up and like do this thing, because I know sometimes like schools will do that, right? They do little experiments.
They'll let you do that. You'll have a
Absolutely.
dedicated space in space where you can do your stuff without commingling with anybody else.
Yeah.
Wow, so it's like office share.
Yes. Yeah. SpaceWorks, whatever you want to call it.
To answer that earlier question, right? What I think, because so much of Earth is remote. There's remote populations. There's rural populations. The things that you're learning in space can be applied immediately to Earth, because what it's going to do is bring people even closer together. So, for example, hey, if it works in space, if it works in a remote environment like space, you can now release it to a remote population here on Earth. So, I mean, there's just some immediate applications that we learn about, like whatever we learn in space can be applied immediately to the Earth environment.
Well, I'm excited because I grew up in the 60s, and a lot of people don't realize how much technology was developed for the space program because they literally had a blank checkbook, like, let's make a microchip, let's make this. And they're like, what are you talking about? So,
Absolutely.
a lot of that kicked off a lot of huge industries now that never would have existed. At least they would have taken a lot longer to make. But now we got this whole nother level where now it's all privatized and they're going to expand. So this has been awesome. So you guys have any final thoughts before we leave for today?
You want to go for it?
Go for it, man.
My whole vision is to make 120 the new 60, and space is a part of it.
All right, man. I'm there with you, buddy. I'll see you on my 120th birthday.
I can't wait to be there.
All right, baby. All right. It's been awesome. You've been listening to Master Your Finance. Have a wonderful day.